Analysis meeting. Thank you for joining the Spencer Island Estuary Restoration Project meeting. My name is Seth Ballhorn, and I'm an environmental planner here with the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Tonight, we'll be presenting an update on the conceptual design for the Spencer Island Estuary Restoration Project. This project is a collaborative effort between Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Army Corps of Engineers, and is occurring on land owned by Department of Fish and Wildlife and Snohomish County. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items on using the Zoom webinar. The audience, you all are in listen-only mode, so you'll only be able to hear and see the presenters. We have enabled closed captioning, but if you'd like to turn it off, you can click on the button with the 2 C's in the toolbar. You can submit questions at any point during the presentation. Just click on the Q&A icon, which is usually located in the lower right of your screen, but it could be on the top right if you're using an iPad or a phone. We will answer questions after the presentation. We will group them together and read them out loud. Following the presentation and the Q&A, we will open the meeting to public comments. If you would like to speak during the public meeting comment period, please click on the raise hand icon. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce DFW Regional Director Brendan Brokes and Snohomish County Planning Manager Eric Stockdale to say a few words about Spencer Island and the importance of the island and this process. Brendan?
Thanks, Seth. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Spencer Island Estuary Restoration Project public meeting, and thanks for joining us. As Seth mentioned, my name is Brendan Brokes. I'm the North Puget Sound Regional Director for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. And our purpose here tonight is to hear your thoughts on what you'd like to see happen out at Spencer as we evaluate the potential changes and options for the restoration project. Spencer Island is a really special place. It's very accessible. It's right next to the proximity of Everett, in the general proximity of Everett. And we are fortunate enough to have really fantastic partners, as Seth mentioned, with the Army Corps of Engineers and Snohomish County Parks. It's a great effort. I'd also like to say thank you to our tribal co-managers who have been engaged and involved and instrumental in moving the project along all the way. So thanks again for coming. Really appreciate it. And I will turn it over to Eric from Surface Water Management.
Good evening. Thank you for attending this online meeting. My name is Eric Stockdale. I'm the planning manager in the Surface Water Management Division. We are one of the 2 large divisions that constitutes the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Spencer Island is one of our many premier parks. It's a very loved location in the estuary. It's the location of one of our first intertidal restoration projects that many users can see and are familiar with at the south end of the island. It's a pleasure to co-manage the island with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we look forward to your thoughts and opinions about how we move forward with this important part of the estuary. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Brendan and Eric. For the sake of brevity, I'd also like to introduce staff that are working on this project and joining us here tonight. From DFW, we have Lauren Brokaw. He's Acting Regional Wildlife Program Manager. Lindsay Desmel, she is the Restoration Coordinator. Duncan Pfeiffer, he's an environmental engineer working on the project. Aaron Couch is our Communications Manager. And Teresa Mitchell is an environmental planner. For the Army Corps, we're joined by Janet Curran. She's a project manager working on the project. Zach Corum, the technical design lead. Nancy Gleason, the senior fish biologist and environmental coordinator. We also have from the county, Mike Reste. He's a project specialist that works in the estuary and has been a tremendous help for us. So what we're going to cover today, I'm going to talk through the history of Spencer Island and give you a little background. Going to talk about the project and go through the alternatives analysis. Lindsay will talk about recreation and public access, and then we will do the Q&A and then turn it over to a public comment period. So in terms of Spencer Island. Spencer Island is in the Snohomish River estuary just east of Everett. Steamboat Slough borders the property to the east, and Union Slough borders the property to the west. The island is co-managed by Department of Fish and Wildlife and Snohomish County. Prior to development, the island was an intertidal forested wetland with large spruce trees and a small slough running through it. In the early 1900s, the site was diked and developed for agriculture, resulting in the loss of tidally influenced forested wetlands and channels that provide important habitat for a variety of fish and wildlife, especially juvenile salmon. Starting in the 1960s, the levees that ring Spencer Island were reinforced with hog fuel, which are wood chips or wood mulch. And then starting in 1989, the site was purchased by Department of Fish and Wildlife and Snohomish County. As you can see in the aerial image here, the site was not inundated when we purchased it in '89, and there was a dike around the entire perimeter of the island. As Eric mentioned, in 1994, the county completed a restoration project that involved removing sections of the dike that allowed tidal water and fish into the southern portion of the property. Part of that project involved building a cross dike through the southern portion of the site. And as you can see in the 2002 image, the cross dike, I'll turn my laser pointer on. There was a cross dike that was constructed to allow freshwater wetland on the northern portion of the site that DFW managed for waterfowl. So fast forward to 2005, the hog fuel levee caught on fire and burned for a portion of the year, and it then created a breach on the northern portion of the island. Around the same time, the cross dike and Steamboat Slough levee were also breached. There was a tie gate on Steamboat Slough that was failing, and other drainage infrastructure failed. So the current conditions, although the site is now tidally inundated, remnant dikes and ditches still occur on the island that reduce habitat benefits for salmon and other species that rely on tidal wetlands. So as you can see, we've got numerous breaches on the southern side. Those were planned, and several breaches on the northern site that were unplanned. Highlighted in yellow, the ditch network that is occurring on the northern section of the island. We do have a culvert that is still on the Union Slough side. So now I'll turn it over to Janet Curran to talk about the state and federal partnership. Janet, you're on mute. We still can't hear you.
I had to talk. I couldn't find the button. When I talked at the phone, it said, "Do you want to unmute?" And so now I'm unmuted. Okay, that's good. Figure that out. So I'm Janet Curran. I'm the project manager for this project with the Army Corps of Engineers. And I'll provide a little bit of background on our authority and our funding for the project. So many years ago, a couple of decades ago, Congress gave the Army Corps authority through what we call the Puget Sound and adjacent waters part of the law. It was so Congress specifically gave us authority and said, go and find opportunities to do good things in Puget Sound for restoration, find partners and look at projects. And so for many years, we partnered on what we call the Puget Sound Nearshore Ecosystem Restoration Project, PSNER. And that was a partnership between the Army Corps of Engineers, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and other local entities to look and see what projects are out there where we could each use our own authorities and work together to try to leverage and our authorities and find ways to restore salmon habitat. So Spencer Island project was identified as part of that PSNURP report. And that was, this goes back to 2016 when we came up with a list of projects. And so it's actually been many years in sort of planning and waiting. And, finally, Congress gave us $9 million. So we're off and running with $9 million that the Army Corps can contribute to the project. So the benefits of this partnership are we have a partnership sharing cost. So for feasibility, that's the phase we're in right now. We have a 50-50 cost share. So the Army Corps pays 50% of the feasibility study and WDFW pays 50%. And then when we move into design and implementation, the federal share is 65% and the non-federal share is 35%. And the good deal for WDFW is that they can also get credit for work in kind for their staff time and their expertise that they lend to the project. And then also the land value. Since WDFW already owns this piece of land, that's a big benefit to the project. That helps us leverage that $9 million even more. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Seth.
Thank you. So I'll walk through the different phases of the project in partnership with Army Corps. So there's two phases, a feasibility phase and a design and implementation phase. As Janet mentioned, they're both cost shared at different ratios. So we are in the feasibility phase. We have developed 10% conceptual designs, and we are conducting an alternatives analysis. After we finish up the alternatives analysis public comment period, we will select an alternative that we will then, in partnership with the Corps, build up to a 35% level design, preliminary design. And the Corps will do a federal environmental review, environmental assessment on that 35% level design and provide updated cost estimates. We anticipate that the feasibility phase of this project will wrap up sometime in early 2024. The next phase is design and implementation, or design and construction phase. And so that there are two additional design phases. There's 65% design and 95% design. And then the Corps will do permitting, contracting, and construction. And we anticipate that that phase will last between 18 and 24 months. So the goals of this project are to more fully restore the processes on the island, including tidal hydrology, sedimentation, channel formation, and detritus exchange. And we are specifically looking to improve the connectivity for juvenile salmon into the site and between Steamboat and Union Sloughs. So this picture up above, this is looking north. This is Spencer Island here, the northern section of Spencer Island in the middle. This is Steamboat Slough along the right and Union Slough along the left. And there are a handful of estuary restoration projects in the vicinity. This is the Smith Island Estuary Restoration Project that the county completed. Up here is Mid-Spencer Restoration Project, and over to the left is Union Slough Restoration Project that was completed by the City of Everett and the Army Corps. So as Janet mentioned, there was a conceptual design developed as part of the PSNURP initiative in 2012. And the basic building blocks for this conceptual design were the following. Lowering the existing dikes. So that's here in the yellow. So shaving off the existing dikes by a couple feet. Additional breaches. So there was a planned breach here. Or widening breaches. And then tidal channel reconfiguration, as well as revegetation of the site. So where we're at is we are in the alternatives analysis stage of the project. And so to evaluate our options for the project, we're doing an alternatives analysis, which is a planning tool used to evaluate a range of choices or alternatives relative to a set of common criteria. So this alternatives analysis was conducted by DFW and the Army Corps using existing landscape level data and existing information. And so now I'll walk through the 10 alternatives that we evaluated. So we evaluated 10 alternatives ranging from no action or doing nothing all the way to fully restoring the site. As you can see, some of the alternatives include bridges. And so any number that has a B variation includes bridges as part of that design. So for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go through every single alternative. I'm just going to pick some of the highlights. So in this alternative, this is called alternative 3, the low restoration with the bridge. It's basically building off the old PSNERP conceptual design where we are lowering the levee. So that's in the light blue or teal. Lowering the levee along Steamboat Slough, and then adding a number of additional breaches along the Steamboat Slough. That's in the dark blue. And the red, you can see we're adding some starter channels to connect the breach to the interior of the island. In addition, we were doing an additional breach on the Union Slough side and adding a bridge and expanding the breach on the northern site. So alternative 4B, we were calling that moderate restoration with bridges. And so as you can see with this, we're keeping all of the breaches along the Steamboat Slough side, lowering the levee along Steamboat Slough. Along Union Slough, we are not lowering it. We are adding 3 additional breaches and putting bridges over that. And then adding ditch fill on the interior and adding some additional channels to reconnect the interior of the marsh to Union Slough and Steamboat Slough. An alternative 5A, this is where we start removing part of the cross dike. So this is a partial removal of the cross dike. From the bridge to the east, the cross dike would be lowered and the bridge going over this breach would be removed. Along the Union Slough side, since this variation does not have bridges, the Union Slough trail would be lowered. The Union Slough dike would be lowered along this extent. So now moving on to alternative 6B. In this alternative, the entire cross dike would be lowered. Part of the Union Slough levee would be lowered, and we would add 3 breaches and put bridges over them. And then alternative 7 is maximum restoration. The entire cross dike would be lowered with additional breaches. The entire Union Slough levee would be lowered with breaches, and there would be ditch blocks and channel reconfiguration on the interior of the island. So now I will hand it over to Zach Coram with the Army Corps to talk about the benefits analysis.
Thank you, Seth. Yeah, next slide if you don't mind. Okay, so again, my name is Zach Coram. I'm a hydraulic engineer with the U.S. Army Corps in Seattle. The main point of this slide is to illustrate how the Army Corps is modeling site conditions at Spencer Island. The first picture in the upper left is what we would call the hydraulic model domain. The model domain is how engineers represent the real world in a computer environment. In this case, we are using detailed survey measurements of the land surface, along with measurements of tides and river flows together in the model to estimate what is happening within and around Spencer Island. The colorful images show velocities and inundation in the model. What the modeling is telling us is that too much flow is coming into and going out of Spencer Island in the location of the accidental levee breach at that tide gate that Seth showed you. That's called out as the white circle with the number 2 next to it. We see a similar situation at the cross dike, where that other white circle is shown with the number 1 next to it. At these locations, the flow of water is unnaturally fast and detrimental for juvenile salmon, which are the primary concern for this project. The charts you see at the bottom of the slide illustrate how the water elevations and velocities can vary when we construct new channels to connect the sloughs to the island. In a nutshell, the more channels we add to the island, the more we spread out the flow of water, and the easier it is for salmon to use this site and complete their life cycle. Next slide, please. This slide shows an animation of water flow into Spencer Island when the tide is coming up. The picture on the left illustrates conditions similar to today. The picture on the right illustrates conditions that we would expect if we were to do maximum restoration, which was, I think, called alternative 7 in the slide that Seth showed. The major difference that we're seeing is that by creating new connections from the island to the sloughs, we allow for much more flow to enter the island from different locations, which reduces the harmful velocities in the main channel connected to Steamboat Slough. We see similar beneficial changes on the outgoing tide, which I'll show you on the next slide, which you can advance to. Okay, so this is the outgoing tide. Basically, it's sort of the reverse of what we just saw. And you know, there's a pretty decent amount of change. And generally what we see is that the velocities within the site are lower and more beneficial for salmon. And basically, the more openings we create, the more inundation we have over the range of tides and river flows that we see. And so that gives the fish more room to use the site and benefit from all the marsh vegetation and forage opportunities that are there. Next slide, please. Before I hand the last part of the presentation over to Nancy and Lindsay, I just want to talk a little bit about how we make decisions about restoration, at least at the Army Corps level. And this slide shows us the way that the Corps is comparing how the various alternatives Seth showed you are being measured to see what is the most beneficial alternative. In a nutshell, we are comparing inundation area and velocities, or how fast the water is moving relative to how fast juvenile fish can swim, you know, like in a normal pace when they're trying to do what they want to do, at those velocity hotspots that I showed you earlier. Alternatives that increase the connection points between the sloughs and Spencer Island increase inundation and reduce velocities to make it easier for more fish to swim around and reside within the site. Alternatives with the most connectivity score the highest. And now I'm going to hand the rest of the talk over to Nancy and Lindsay. Nancy's our senior biologist to explain how we ended up scoring what we call the benefits of those 10 alternatives that we showed you earlier. Next slide, and I'm going to go on mute. All right.
Thanks, Zach. That was great. So here is the list of alternatives again. On the previous slide, you saw components labeled as metrics. So we have a method of scoring each of these alternatives. So this list shows the preliminary results of our ecosystem benefits scoring method. We have designed a range of alternatives. As Seth mentioned, they increase in scope and level of effort, everything from taking no action at all the way up to the maximum we would possibly do on the site. And also note here that for alternatives 4, 5, and 6, you'll see again that those have options with and without bridges. So for each place where we keep or construct a bridge, we have a slightly lower ecosystem benefits score for restoration, just due to the fact of a smaller hydraulic connection so that we can maintain the ground support needed to hold up a bridge. So as you saw in the previous slide, everything was about connectivity. And so we have just slightly reduced opening sizes in places where we need to put a bridge across. So right now we're in our alternatives analysis phase and want to understand what everyone's desires and priorities are for the recreational aspects at Spencer Island site. So as this is our preliminary list of alternatives, hearing from the public now will help us screen out alternatives to get to a final short list to analyze further. And now I will hand it over to Lindsay.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. So I just wanted to remind everyone or let those folks know who don't already know, Spencer Island is part of WDFW's Snoqualmie Wildlife Area, and a wildlife area management plan was updated, I believe, in 2018. And laid out some goals for the wildlife area. The first goal is to restore and protect the integrity of priority ecological systems and sites. The second goal is to sustain individual species through habitat and population management actions. And then the third goal is to provide fishing, hunting, and wildlife-related recreational opportunities. So for those of you who are familiar with WDFW's mission statement, it's really twofold. We aim to protect species and their habitats, and we also aim to provide recreational opportunities. A lot of times this can be really challenging, especially when we're looking at a site like Spencer Island, where we want to make it better for juvenile salmon, but we know it's so important to you folks who use it on a regular basis recreationally. Next slide. So you guys have heard a lot about bridges in this presentation. You'll notice the map on the right just gives a little outline about where we're looking at bridges on Spencer Island. So it's primarily on the Union Slough side, and that's really to access WDFW's property currently. There's a lot of different considerations when we're looking at bridges, the material that we're using, the location, whether they're pedestrian bridges or need to support vehicles. All of this also affects the cost of the bridge. And so these are all the things that we'll be considering if we do decide we want to move forward with the bridge alternative. Next slide. Another really, really important consideration when we're looking at bridges is, are these gonna be there in 5 years? Are they gonna stay intact? Are they gonna stay useful? Spencer Island is tidal, so it's got the tide coming in from Puget Sound. It's got the river flow, and the Snohomish River does flood every now and again. And so if we do decide to put in bridges, we're going to need to really make sure that those bridges remain functional over time. And this is actually a photo of one of the bridges on Snohomish County's property that was actually washed out and washed downstream, I believe in the early 2000s, and it was replaced, but it just goes to show it can happen. Next slide. Another thing to consider when we're looking at recreation, both currently and in the future, is the condition of the levees. The trail is on top of the levee system. And for those of you who have been out there recently, it's in variable condition. We're seeing a lot of erosion on the levee trail. We're seeing a lot of kind of sloughing off down the bank. A lot of it's also overgrown. The Army Corps did do a preliminary investigation into that levee system to see, is it going to be able to support the trail and bridges into the future? They're in pretty poor shape. Really, there's a lot of compaction out there, and the more material we add to the top of them, the more it's just going to aid in that compaction. And so we need to look really realistically about how long these levees are going to last into the future if we do decide it's priority to keep them as is, to keep the trail system, that kind of thing. Next slide. So all of that being said, potentially there are changes coming. There could be changes in the levee trail system that you all know and love out there now. They could be shortened, they could be taken away. That's not to say they can't be replaced with something else. So we are open to any creative ideas that you guys have, assuming it is fundable and permittable. So anything like a viewing platform out there to help birders view the plethora of birds out there. Interpretive signs, I know that's something that everyone's asking for. What is this place? Can you give us a map? Can you give us signs? You know, any kind of boardwalk system or other recreational trail system. You know, we want to hear your ideas. Next slide. And finally, our North End property on DFW property is open for waterfowl hunting in waterfowl season. And so I don't want to leave out the hunters. You know, if you guys have ideas for things you would like to see out here, floating blinds, anything like that to make it more accessible and just better for the experience, you know, those are the kinds of things that we are receptive to. So feel free to reach out and let us know. And I think that's all I have. So I'll hand it back over to Seth.
Thanks, Lindsay. So now it is, we will take questions. Do folks in attendance have any questions? If so, please